Welcome back. You're watching News Center. The Prime Minister has launched Meri Pehchaan. This is a national single sign-on service that will get rid of the need to repeatedly provide credentials for various government applications and services. Users can be authenticated using Aadhaar, and the data will be stored in Aadhaar Vault as per the current law. The goal is to simplify access to government services, but what about privacy and data protection? Let me go across to Apar Guta, the Executive Director at Internet Freedom Foundation, and NS Nappinai, cyber law expert. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin with Apar Guta. Apar, how is this different from DigiLocker, which already existed?
So if anybody goes on meripehchaan.gov.in, they will see that it is asking people to sign up by itself and provide details of their Aadhaar and PAN, through which they can create a single sign-on, which can then be used across different services. So it goes beyond DigiLocker to any other government website which you may want to access, and then utilizes this Meri Pehchaan platform. Now, if you look at the privacy policy by itself, it is saying that it does not, there's just one line. It says that Meri Pehchaan does not store Aadhaar number. It merely facilitates verification of an individual's identity by directly authenticating with the Aadhaar platform in accordance with the Aadhaar Act. And what becomes important for us to understand here is that the privacy policy is not spelling out how your login information and the services you may access through this single sign-on, which are technically implemented, the data which goes back to Meri Pehchaan or to a backend server, how that will be stored, how it will be shared, and how secure it will be.
Right. NS Nappinai, to get you in, how useful would this be in improving access to public services? What safety nets are required?
The first thing, Parikshit, is that we need safety nets. And that's effectively still not in place. And I'm referring to our personal data protection laws, which are still not in place. We do have some skeletal provisions under the Information Technology Act, but the very fact that the Puchaswamy judgment recognized that it was not sufficient and that the government needed to come forward with robust laws, and that was as of 2017, which still remains pending, is a reflection of what we need today in terms of safety nets. So when you're talking about something akin to and something more than just a DigiLocker, you're aware that it was already there as a construct under the Information Technology Act, under 6A for DigiLockers, and also the rules framed under that. But what you're talking about today in terms of Meri Pehchaan is supposed to be of a higher order. And the very first step would be to have a better and a more robust privacy policy. The second step, because we don't have to wait for the personal data protection law to come in, we can still extend it. We are already doing it when we have to comply with GDPR mandates if we are dealing with other jurisdictions, right? So why not ensure the same level of protection already through contractual processes, which will be the privacy policy right away? And of course, we need to bring in the statutory protections also, which will reflect our fundamental right to privacy through the personal data protection law. So recent reports indicate that the government has again come a full circle to go back to having a personal data protection law instead of a composite of personal and non-personal data. Given that 2 drafts have already been circulated and many inputs have already been given on that, it should not take too long for a personal data protection enactment to put in place.
Right. Let me go back to Apar Gupta. Apar, does the single identifier run the risk of surveillance if adequate safeguards are not in place?
So if you notice, there is a large amount of government commentary now that data silos needs to be broken. Silos essentially is a long cylindrical structure in which grain is stored, and essentially it prevents pulse from mixing with the rice, possibly if 2 silos are next to each other. What this word actually means is that when data is gathered with respect to your interaction with any service of an individual with, let's say, Facebook, and Facebook keeps it. But if you also interact with Google and Google keeps it, but if you have data which is combined both from Facebook and Google, it gives a deeper insight into the activities of a person. And this is what you raised in terms of a surveillance sphere. Now, the single sign-on service which is there will have a limited amount of data, as I can read as a non-technical layperson from its API documentation. But what makes it more important is that there is, as Nappinai ji was saying, there's an absence of a data protection law and thereby an absence of an independent regulatory authority under it, such as a data protection authority, which would actually audit what kinds of data are flowing to Meri Pehchaan or the backend server when you access different government services using this single sign-on. Number two, for what purposes is this data used, processed, and how is it shared? So the surveillance spheres by themselves will remain unaddressed till there's actually a legal safeguard, independent regulatory authority, and actual checks implemented by it.
Right. NS Nappinai, do you believe that before the implementation of such a scheme, before we roll this Meri Pehchaan app or scheme out, it would be more important to have the safeguards in place, have the contours of the data protection bill in place as well?
Indeed, Parikshit. We have already heard governments come in to say that everything will come with certain loopholes or problems, and we will repair it along the way. It cannot be done that way with respect to the kind of data that you would be collecting with Digital India initiatives, because we already know what the risks are with respect to collection of this level of data. Therefore, it cannot be heard, nobody, least of all government, can be heard to say that we will figure out the loopholes later. Whenever we cannot eschew technology and we should embrace it, and if technology is being put to good use for the benefit of people and to make their lives easier, all the more welcome to it. But whilst doing so, there have to be safety nets and safeguards in place in advance. It can't be looked upon as something which can be plugged in later. We already know the problems that are there, and at least to the extent of known threats, safeguards will protect against them. Unknown unknowns are something which we are already looking at, ensuring safeguards as a preemptive measure. So why would we not have safeguards for known threats? So therefore, yes, of course, I would definitely add that to my wish list when any kind of a Digital India initiative is being proposed or launched.
Right. And how would it really improve the access to public services for every part of the Indian society? Apar, you've also spoken about the digital divide. What more investments do we need to make sure that these services are accessible to most people across the country, and not just those who have access to mobile phones, smartphones?
So, Parikshit, that's a very good question. We put out a connectivity tracker where we try to analyze the various levels at which there's an access problem in India. So while people in metropolitan cities like Delhi have a very high tele-density, in which as per the recorded population, there may be more than 2 broadband connections. There are certain places in Odisha and Rajasthan which do not have underlying network infrastructure which needs to be created by itself, because the purchasing power of the people in those villages will not incentivize a private service provider to set up a cell tower, make that infrastructure there. So the government has what is called a USOF fund, and it needs to deploy it. It's been deploying it. We need to remember that over a decade, there's been a 10-fold increase actually for 60 million to 600 million connections, but that's concentrated again in metropolitan cities. The second issue which is there is that on lines of gender, economic entitlement, etc., there's also a huge degree of a distinction between which groups have access, which don't. In poorer households, the male usually has the smartphone, keeps the smartphone, and women do not get it. So this manifests itself in terms of a real access divide, which has practical consequences. For instance, when the CoWIN website, which is also mentioned in the Prime Minister's address yesterday to inaugurate the Digital India Summit, summit as a huge success, we should remember that the 18 to 44 age bracket where vaccination was opened was done on the CoWIN portal. So who would have registered there first would have been a person with a smartphone or a computer with access to the internet, as opposed to a person who did not have access to the internet, did not know English, and could not register on CoWIN. So what is important when it comes through this is that adequate investments are needed and need to be continuously made in alternate modes and physical modes, because a large number of people in India remain disconnected, remain outside the ability to access the internet and government platforms, which are through e-government services.
All right. Okay, we've completely run out of time, but one quick question that I'd like to put, and this is about Twitter. I'll put this to both Apar Guta and NS Nappinai. This is about Twitter. Reports coming in that Twitter is now pursuing judicial review of India's content takedown orders. How do you think this is likely to play out, Apar?
I would pass that on to Nappinai ji. I've taken a lot of time here.
Thank you, Apar. So there were two
NS
things.
Nappinai, how do you... Yeah.
Yeah. So one, Twitter had the legal right to go before a court of law at any point of time. But my take on this is that I believe that they would have to take up each issue in itself, and it may be difficult for them to contest in terms of a blanket order. And that's something which is not too clear in terms of news reports today. On the earlier topic, in terms of the Meri Pehchaan, one aspect I wanted to come in on is the security aspect. We didn't really address that aspect. And my wish list in terms of Meri Pehchaan also is if it can root out KYC frauds. And those are becoming the basis for various cyber crimes to be committed. So here is another aspect which I feel that should be considered. So with that, over to you, Parikshit.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Nappinai, for joining us. Thanks very much to Apar Gupta as well. We've completely run out of time on News Center. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.